The whistle of a distant train echoed through the Montana territory as Adelaide Foster clutched the letter that had just shattered her world. Trembling fingers traced over the words that banished her from the only home she'd ever known, a cruel sentence for daring to love a man her father had deemed unworthy. It was 1875, and at 22 years old, Adelaide found herself standing at the dusty crossroads outside of Silver Creek, a town she would no longer be allowed to call home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling plains as she adjusted her modest blue traveling dress and pulled her carpetbag closer. "Miss Foster!" A deep voice called from behind. Adelaide turned, quickly wiping away a stray tear. A tall man stood several paces away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. He removed his worn cowboy hat, revealing sandy blonde hair and kind eyes that seemed to catch the last golden rays of daylight. "I heard what happened," he said, approaching slowly. "Name's Kieran Blackwood. I work at the Double J Ranch just north of here." Adelaide lifted her chin, unwilling to show the depth of her pain to a stranger. "News travels fast in Silver Creek, I see." "Small towns rarely keep secrets," Kieran replied, his voice carrying a gentle rasp. "I'm heading up to Helena. Could offer you a ride if you're needing to get away from here." Adelaide studied him carefully. She'd seen him around town occasionally, a quiet ranch hand who kept to himself, but was known for fair dealings and hard work. Nothing like Thomas Garrett, the charming but ultimately dishonorable man whose false promises had led to her current predicament. "Why would you help me?" she asked suspiciously. "Everyone else in town is treating me like I'm wearing a scarlet letter." Kieran shifted his weight from one boot to the other. "Because what happened to you ain't right. Loving someone shouldn't be a crime, even if your father and the rest of this town think otherwise." Adelaide felt the weight of the past few days pressing down on her. Her father, the respected Judge William Foster, had discovered her secret courtship with Thomas, the son of his longtime rival. When Thomas revealed his true character by denying their relationship and announcing his engagement to a wealthy banker's daughter from Helena, Adelaide's shame became complete. Her father's ultimatum had been clear: leave town or face public humiliation, as he pressed false charges against her for theft from his own household. "I have an aunt in Helena," she admitted quietly. "She doesn't know I'm coming, but she's the only family who might take me in." Kieran nodded. "My wagon's just over the hill. It's not the finest transportation, but it'll get you there by tomorrow afternoon." As they walked toward his wagon, Adelaide felt the curious stares of several townspeople who had gathered to witness her departure. Whispers followed them like shadows. "You don't have to do this," Adelaide said as they reached his wagon. "Associating with me won't do your reputation any favors." Kieran helped her onto the wooden seat before climbing up beside her. "Miss Foster, I've never much cared for what people think. And from where I'm standing, you're the only one in this whole situation who's shown any real character." The wagon lurched forward, dust billowing behind them as Silver Creek began to fade into the distance. Adelaide didn't look back. There was nothing there for her anymore. As they traveled through the afternoon and into early evening, the vast Montana landscape stretched before them, rolling hills giving way to rocky outcroppings and stands of ponderosa pine. They made camp as night fell, and Kieran built a small fire while Adelaide sat wrapped in a blanket he had provided. "How long have you worked at the Double J?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Going on 5 years now," Kieran replied, stirring the beans he was heating over the fire. "Came out west after the war looking for something different." "You fought in the war?" Adelaide asked, suddenly seeing him in a new light. Kieran nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "Union cavalry. Joined up when I was 18, right before it ended. Didn't see much fighting, thankfully. After it was over, there wasn't much left for me back in Pennsylvania. I was just a child when it ended, Adelaide said softly. My mother passed during that time. Father was never the same after that. Kieran handed her a tin plate of beans. Loss changes people. Some grow harder, some kinder. Seems your father chose the former. Adelaide accepted the plate, their fingers briefly touching. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when he laughed and showed affection. After Mother died, it was like all the warmth drained from him. They ate in silence for a while, the crackling fire and distant howl of coyotes the only sounds interrupting the still night. "Can I ask what happened?" Kieran finally said. "With the man your father disapproved of?" Adelaide tensed, then sighed. "Thomas Garrett. His father and mine have been rivals since before I was born. Something about land and water rights decades ago. We met at a town gathering last spring and began meeting in secret. I thought." She paused, embarrassed by her naivety. "I thought he loved me." "But he didn't," Kieran stated simply. "No. When Father confronted him, Thomas denied everything, said I had pursued him relentlessly and that he had only been polite in response." Adelaide's voice hardened. The next day, his engagement announcement to Margaret Sullivan appeared in the newspaper. Kieran shook his head. Coward. Father was humiliated. He said I had brought shame to our family name by consorting with a Garrett. When he discovered Thomas's betrayal, rather than offering comfort, he gave me an ultimatum: leave town voluntarily or be publicly accused of stealing family heirlooms. That's why everyone was looking at you like that, Kieran realized. He's already spreading the theft story. Adelaide nodded, her throat tight. He allowed me to take only what I could carry in this bag. Everything else, my mother's jewelry, my books, even my journals, remains locked in his house. Kieran added another log to the fire, sending sparks floating toward the star-filled sky. Your father is wrong, you know. You shouldn't be punished for having an open heart. An open but foolish heart, Adelaide corrected. No, Kieran said firmly, looking directly at her. There's nothing foolish about believing in love. The way I see it, you're the only honorable one in this whole mess. His words wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, and for the first time since her world had collapsed, Adelaide felt a small spark of something resembling hope. Morning came with a gentle mist hovering over the land. Adelaide awoke to find Kieran already up, tending to his horses and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack. Not much of a meal, he apologized, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee, but it'll keep us going until we reach Helena. As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change, with mountains rising in the distance and the terrain becoming more rugged. Adelaide found herself drawn to Kieran's quiet strength and unexpected kindness. Unlike the men she had known in Silver Creek who wore their importance like badges, Kieran seemed unconcerned with status or appearance. "What will you do in Helena?" he asked as they navigated a particularly bumpy stretch of trail. "I hope my aunt will take me in, at least temporarily," Adelaide replied. "She was my mother's sister and never approved of my father. Beyond that," she shook her head. "I have some skill with numbers. Perhaps I could find work as a shopkeeper's assistant or a teacher if any school would have me." Kieran glanced at her. "You're educated then." "My mother insisted on it. Father allowed it because he believed it made me a more suitable match for the right gentleman." Adelaide gave a bitter laugh. "I don't think this is what either of them had in mind for my future." "Sometimes the paths we don't choose turn out better than the ones laid out for us," Kieran offered. "I never planned to be a ranch hand in Montana, but here I am, and I can't say I regret it." By mid-afternoon, The buildings of Helena came into view, a bustling mining town that had grown substantially since its gold rush days. Unlike the smaller Silver Creek, Helena boasted proper streets, brick buildings, and a sense of progress that was palpable even from a distance. "Where does your aunt live?" Kieran asked as they entered the outskirts of town. "Chestnut Street, according to the last letter I received from her," Adelaide said. "It's been nearly 2 years since we've corresponded. Father discouraged the connection." They made their way through the busy streets, Adelaide growing increasingly nervous about her reception. What if Aunt Martha turned her away? What if she had moved or, worse, passed on? When they finally located the modest house on Chestnut Street, Adelaide hesitated. "Perhaps you should wait here. I don't know how she'll react to my arrival, especially with a stranger." Kieran nodded. "I'll wait. Take all the time you need." With trembling hands, Adelaide approached the door and knocked. Long moments passed before it opened, revealing a slender woman with graying auburn hair and features that reminded Adelaide painfully of her mother. "Yes?" the woman asked, squinting slightly at her visitor. "Aunt Martha, it's Adelaide, Adelaide Foster." Her voice caught. "Your sister Margaret's daughter." Martha's eyes widened in recognition, then softened with immediate concern. "Adelaide, good heavens, child, what are you doing here?" Before Adelaide could formulate a response that wouldn't immediately dissolve into tears, Martha noticed her luggage and Kieran waiting by the wagon. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Come inside, dear. Both of you," she added, gesturing to Kieran. "It seems we have much to discuss." Once inside the cozy parlor, Adelaide found herself pouring out the entire story: Thomas's betrayal, her father's ultimatum, and Kieran's unexpected kindness. Martha listened without interruption, her expression alternating between outrage and sympathy. "William always was a prideful man," she finally said when Adelaide finished. "My sister saw good in him that the rest of us missed. But to cast out his only child, that goes beyond pride into cruelty." She turned to Kieran. "Thank you for bringing my niece safely to me, Mr. Blackwood. It seems you're a rare gentleman indeed." Kieran shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Martha replied firmly. "Now you must be exhausted from your journey. I insist you stay for dinner at the very least." As Martha bustled about preparing the meal, Adelaide helped set the table, stealing glances at Kieran, who seemed both out of place and perfectly at ease in the small home. When their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Over a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken and vegetables, Martha revealed that she worked as a seamstress for one of Helena's most prestigious dress shops. "In fact," she said, "Mrs. Holloway just mentioned yesterday that she's looking for another assistant. Someone with a good head for numbers to help with the bookkeeping." Adelaide's heart lifted slightly. "Do you think she would consider me with my recommendation?" "Absolutely," Martha assured her. "And you'll stay here with me, of course. The house may be small, but there's a perfectly good second bedroom that's just gathering dust." As evening settled in, Kieran reluctantly rose to leave. "I should find lodging for the night. I need to be back at the ranch by tomorrow evening." Adelaide walked him to the door, suddenly aware that their paths were about to diverge, perhaps permanently. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "No thanks needed," Kieran replied. "But I would like to check on you when I'm next in Helena, if that would be all right." Adelaide felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that very much." After Kieran left, Martha studied her niece's face thoughtfully. "That young man cares for you." "We barely know each other," Adelaide protested. Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind hasn't yet realized, Martha said simply. Now, let's get you settled. Tomorrow begins your new life. True to Martha's word, Mrs. Holloway hired Adelaide the very next day, impressed by her education and quick grasp of the shop's accounting system. The work was demanding but satisfying, and for the first time in her life, Adelaide experienced the pride of earning her own living. Weeks passed, turning into months as summer faded into a crisp Montana autumn. Adelaide gradually built a new life in Helena, making cautious friendships and earning respect for her diligence and skill. Yet despite her outward adaptation, the wounds of her banishment remained tender. No letters came from her father, and occasionally the whispers followed her, even hear fragments of rumors that had traveled from Silver Creek. It was on a golden October afternoon when Adelaide looked up from her ledger to find Kieran Blackwood standing in the doorway of Holloway's dress shop, hat in hand and a tentative smile on his face. Her heart performed an unexpected leap. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted him, aware of Mrs. Holloway's curious glance. "What brings you to Helena?" "Ranch business," he replied. "Delivering some horses to the cavalry post. I was hoping I might call on you if you're free this evening." That evening, Kieran escorted Adelaide to a small restaurant near the town square. As they walked through the streets illuminated by newly installed gas lamps, Adelaide was struck by how comfortable she felt in his presence. "How are you finding life in Helena?" he asked as they settled at their table. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Aunt Martha has been a blessing and the work challenges me in ways I never anticipated. And you, how fares life at the Double J?" "Changed," Kieran said, surprising her. "Mr. Jenkins, the owner, is getting on in years. He's talking about selling some of his land." "And what would that mean for you?" Kieran hesitated. "Actually, I've been considering buying a piece of it myself. The north section, about 80 acres with good water access. I've saved nearly enough over the years." Adelaide's eyes widened. "Your own ranch? That's wonderful news, Kieran." "It's just a small homestead, nothing fancy," he clarified. "But it would be mine, a place to build something lasting." Their conversation flowed easily throughout the meal, touching on books they'd both read, experiences from their different upbringings, and dreams that had seemed impossible until recently. As they walked back toward Martha's house under a canopy of stars, Kieran grew quieter. Outside her aunt's front gate, he finally spoke what was clearly on his mind. "I've thought about you often, Adelaide, more than I probably should." Adelaide felt her pulse quicken. "I've thought of you too." "I'll be in Helena for 3 more days," he said. "May I call on you again tomorrow?" "I would be disappointed if you didn't," she replied honestly. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of shared moments: an afternoon picnic by the creek outside town, an evening at Helena's small theater watching traveling performers, and walks through the town as Kieran pointed out changes since his last visit, and Adelaide shared discoveries from her new life. On his final evening in Helena, Kieran presented Adelaide with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something to remember me by," he said bashfully. Inside, she found a beautifully bound journal with cream-colored pages. "To replace the ones you had to leave behind," he explained. "Every story deserves to be continued." The gesture brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you. I've missed writing more than I realized." "Adelaide," Kieran began hesitantly. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I'd like to write to you if that would be welcome." "Very welcome," she assured him, her heart full of emotions she wasn't ready to name. When he left the following morning, Adelaide stood at the edge of town watching his figure grow smaller against the horizon, the journal clutched to her chest like a talisman. Winter descended on Helena with a fury that Adelaide had never experienced in Silver Creek. Snow piled high in the streets, and bitter winds howled through the cracks of even the most well-built homes. Yet despite the harsh conditions, Adelaide found herself flourishing. Mrs. Holloway had increased her responsibilities at the shop, and her aunt's home had become a true sanctuary. Kieran's letters arrived regularly, delivered by the stagecoach that braved the winter routes. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a cowboy, his words thoughtful and often laced with dry humor that made Adelaide laugh aloud. He wrote of his progress securing the land from Mr. Jenkins, the cabin he had begun building in preparation, and his hopes for the future. In return, Adelaide filled pages with stories of her new life, the characters she encountered in the dress shop, and the gradual healing of her heart. What began as friendly correspondence slowly evolved into something deeper, as they shared thoughts and dreams they had revealed to no one else. It was in February, during the coldest part of winter, when Martha fell ill with pneumonia. For 2 terrifying weeks, Adelaide barely left her aunt's side, sponging her fevered brow and forcing broth between her cracked lips whenever possible. When the crisis finally passed, and Martha began to recover, Adelaide found herself exhausted but profoundly grateful. "You should write to your cowboy," Martha suggested weakly from her sick bed. "Tell him what happened." "He's not my cowboy," Adelaide protested, though her blush betrayed her. "The way your face lights up when his letters arrive suggests otherwise," Martha replied with a knowing smile. That night, Adelaide wrote the most personal letter yet to Kieran, confessing her fear of losing her aunt, the only family who had stood by her, and her growing realization of what truly mattered in life. His response came faster than usual, as if he had ridden to the post office immediately upon receiving her letter. The pages contained not only sympathy for Martha's illness, but a vulnerability Adelaide hadn't expected. "When I think of you facing such fears alone, I find myself wishing I could be there beside you. Not because you need anyone's help, you've proven your strength beyond question, but because the thought of you in distress while I am miles away feels unbearable. I realize now that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship. Perhaps it's too soon to express such sentiments, especially through mere paper and ink, but if this winter has taught me anything, it's that life is too uncertain for hesitation." Adelaide read the letter until the words blurred before her eyes, her heart racing with recognition of her own unspoken feelings. As winter grudgingly gave way to spring, Adelaide's correspondence with Kieran grew more open about their developing feelings. In late March, a letter arrived announcing his plans to visit Helena in April to finalize the purchase of his land. The countdown to his arrival made each day seem both endless and fleeting as Adelaide found herself planning what to wear and imagining their reunion. The afternoon Kieran was due to arrive, Adelaide left the dress shop early, her nerves making her hands tremble as she changed into her best day dress, a cornflower blue that Martha insisted brought out her eyes. She had just finished arranging her hair when a knock came at the door. When she opened it, the sight of Kieran standing there taller than she remembered, his face more tanned but his eyes exactly as warm as she recalled, made her breath catch. "Adelaide," he said softly, as if her name were something precious. Before propriety could assert itself, Adelaide stepped forward and embraced him, feeling his momentary surprise before his arms encircled her. "I've missed you," she whispered. "And I you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I can say." That evening, over dinner at Martha's table, Kieran shared his news. "The land is mine," he announced. "Signed the final papers this morning. 80 acres of good Montana territory." "That calls for celebration," Martha declared, bringing out a bottle of blackberry wine she had been saving for a special occasion. As they raised their glasses, Adelaide found herself studying Kieran's face, noting the new lines around his eyes and the confidence in his posture. This was no longer just the kind stranger who had helped her in a moment of need. This was a man who had become essential to her happiness. Later, while Martha tactfully busied herself in the kitchen, Kieran and Adelaide sat in the small parlor, the space between them on the sofa smaller than propriety might dictate. "The cabin is nearly finished," Kieran said. "Nothing fancy but solid. 2 rooms for now with space to expand." "It sounds wonderful," Adelaide replied sincerely. Kieran took a deep breath. "I didn't come to Helena just for the land papers, Adelaide. I came because I needed to see you to tell you something in person rather than in a letter." Adelaide felt her heart quicken. "What is it?" "These past months of writing to you, of sharing thoughts and dreams, they've been the happiest of my life," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it may seem fast, but I've come to care for you deeply. More than care. I believe I'm falling in love with you, Adelaide Foster." The words hung in the air between them, weightier than any Adelaide had ever heard. In that moment, memories of Thomas's false declaration seemed to fade like morning mist, insubstantial compared to the honest emotion in Kieran's eyes. "I don't expect an answer now," he continued hurriedly. "I know you've been hurt, and the last thing I want is to rush you or make you uncomfortable." Adelaide placed her hand over his, halting his words. "Kieran," she said softly, "I believe I'm falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. With gentle reverence, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth cascading through her. "May I court you properly, Adelaide Foster?" he asked formally. "With your aunt's blessing and all the respect you deserve," Adelaide nodded, tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like that very much." The next week passed in a blur of joy as Kieran extended his stay in Helena. Each day he called at the dress shop to walk Adelaide home, much to Mrs. Holloway's romantic delight. They took walks through the awakening spring landscape, attended church together on Sunday, and spent evenings in Martha's parlor, sometimes talking until the fire burned low. On his final day in Helena, before returning to finish preparations at his new homestead, Kieran took Adelaide to the same restaurant where they had shared their first meal in the city. "I have something to ask you," he said as they finished their dessert. "Something important." Adelaide's pulse fluttered with anticipation. "Yes, the land is ready. The cabin will be finished by the end of May." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I can't imagine building that life without you. Adelaide Foster, will you marry me?" Though she had begun to hope for this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. This was nothing like Thomas's vague promises of someday. This was real, solid, and true. "Before you answer," Kieran continued, "you should know what I'm offering. It won't be an easy life, especially at first. The cabin is simple, the work will be hard, and luxuries will be few. But I promise you this, you will never doubt my love or my respect. You will never be made to feel less than the remarkable woman you are." Tears spilled onto Adelaide's cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Blackwood." When they shared the news with Martha that evening, her aunt embraced them both with tearful joy. "Your mother would have loved him," she whispered to Adelaide. She valued honesty and kindness above all else. Plans were quickly set in motion. They would marry in Helena at the end of May, giving Kieran time to complete the cabin and Adelaide time to finish training her replacement at the dress shop. Mrs. Holloway, upon hearing the news, insisted on gifting Adelaide a wedding dress from the finest materials in her shop. "Every bride should feel beautiful," she declared, waving away Adelaide's protests about the expense. As word of the engagement spread through Helena, Adelaide was touched by the community's positive response. Many of Mrs. Holloway's customers brought small gifts or offers of help, and the pastor's wife organized a gathering where local women presented Adelaide with household items for her new home. It was a stark contrast to the rejection she had faced in Silver Creek, and the difference wasn't lost on her. These people knew nothing of her past disgrace. They judged her only by the woman she had proven herself to be in their midst. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Kieran traveled back and forth between his homestead and Helena, bringing news of the cabin's progress and occasionally small treasures he had acquired for their home, a set of china plates from a widow selling her household goods, a hand-carved rocking chair from a craftsman in a neighboring settlement. 2 weeks before the wedding, as Adelaide was arranging these items in the trunk that would travel to her new home, Martha entered the bedroom with a peculiar expression. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her tone guarded. "In the parlor." Adelaide's curiosity turned to shock when she entered the room to find her father standing stiffly by the window. Judge William Foster looked older than when she had last seen him, his always rigid posture now slightly stooped, new lines etched deeply around his mouth. "Father," she gasped, frozen in the doorway. He turned, his eyes so like her own taking in her appearance with an unreadable expression. "Adelaide," he acknowledged with a slight nod. Martha hovered protectively in the doorway. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me," she said pointedly to Adelaide before reluctantly withdrawing. For long moments, father and daughter regarded each other in silence. Adelaide found herself standing taller, lifting her chin in a gesture that once would have earned her a reprimand for pride. "You look well," he finally said. "I am well," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Judge Foster cleared his throat. "I received word of your engagement." "News travels fast," Adelaide observed, echoing Kieran's words from their first meeting. "Even between Helena and Silver Creek." "The Garrett boy is married now," her father continued, as if this information should matter to her. "To the Sullivan girl. They've moved to Denver." Adelaide felt a distant twinge of what might once have been pain, now merely a fading bruise. "I wish them well," she said truthfully. Her father's eyebrows rose slightly at her response. "Do you?" When she merely nodded, he sighed heavily. "I misjudged the situation, it seems." "Which situation would that be, father? My feelings for Thomas, his character, or my worthiness to remain in my childhood home?" The questions emerged without bitterness, simply facts laid bare. Judge Foster flinched visibly. "All of those, perhaps." He moved to the sofa, lowering himself with the careful movements of a man feeling his age. "I've brought something that belongs to you." From inside his coat, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Your mother's pearls. She would have wanted you to have them for your wedding day." Adelaide stared at the offered pouch, emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to refuse to tell him that he had forfeited the right to give her anything when he had cast her out. But another part recognized the gesture for what it was. Perhaps the closest thing to an apology her proud father could manage. She accepted the pouch, feeling the familiar weight of the necklace inside. "Thank you," she said simply. "This man you're marrying," her father said. "What do you know of him?" Adelaide almost laughed at the irony of his concern now after everything. "I know that he is honorable, hardworking, and kind. I know that when everyone else in Silver Creek turned their backs on me, including my own father, he offered help without judgment. A cowboy, I understand. A rancher," Adelaide corrected. "He owns land north of here. Good land with water rights." Something like respect flickered across her father's features. "Martha tells me he fought for the Union." Adelaide nodded. "Near the end of the war. He doesn't speak of it often." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, decades of rigid formality and recent hurt creating a gulf too wide to bridge in a single conversation. "Will you attend the wedding?" Adelaide finally asked, though she already knew the answer. Judge Foster shook his head. "I don't think that would be appropriate. But I wanted you to have the pearls and to see for myself that you were well." As he rose to leave, Adelaide felt a surge of emotion, not the desperate yearning for approval that had characterized so much of her life, but a complex mixture of grief for what could have been and acceptance of what was. "Father," she said as he reached the door, "I hope you find happiness too." He paused, his back to her, shoulders stiffening momentarily before he nodded once and departed without looking back. Martha found Adelaide still standing in the parlor, the pearl necklace clutched in her hand. "Are you all right?" her aunt asked gently. Adelaide took a deep breath, surprised to find that she truly was. "Yes," she said. "I think I finally am." The following day, Adelaide shared the encounter with Kieran during his latest visit to Helena. They sat on a bench in the small park near the church, spring flowers blooming around them. "He came all this way just to give you the necklace?" Kieran asked, his expression concerned. "And to see that I hadn't fallen into ruin without his guidance," Adelaide added with a wry smile. "I think he was surprised to find me thriving." Kieran took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Are you disappointed that he won't attend the wedding?" Adelaide considered the question honestly. "A part of me is," she admitted. "The little girl who still longs for her father's approval, but mostly I'm at peace with it. Our ceremony will be filled with people who truly support our happiness, your friends from the ranch, Aunt Martha, Mrs. Holloway. That matters more." Kieran raised her hand to his lips. "You continue to amaze me with your strength, Adelaide Foster." "Soon to be Adelaide Blackwood," she reminded him with a smile, his eyes darkened with emotion. "I can hardly believe it's real sometimes." "Believe it," she whispered, leaning forward to press a chaste kiss to his cheek, propriety be damned. As May drew to a close, the day of the wedding arrived with perfect blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. The small church in Helena was decorated simply, but beautifully with spring blooms gathered by Martha and the pastor's wife. In the small anteroom, Adelaide stood in her wedding dress, an elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha fastened her mother's pearls around her neck, their cool weight a connection to the past that felt right for this step into her future. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become," Martha said, smoothing a curl that had escaped Adelaide's upswept hair. "And so am I." A knock at the door announced the pastor, ready to begin the ceremony. Adelaide took a deep breath, gathered her small bouquet of wildflowers, and nodded. The church was filled with familiar faces, customers from the dress shop, neighbors who had welcomed her to Helena, and several weathered cowboys from the Double J who had made the journey to support Kieran. As the simple melody from the church's piano filled the air, Adelaide began her walk down the aisle. At the altar stood Kieran, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his usually untamed hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with undisguised adoration. The journey to reach him seemed both eternal and instantaneous. When they joined hands before the pastor, Adelaide felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the doubts and pain that had led her to this moment. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly and from the heart. "I, Kieran James Blackwood, take you," Adelaide Rose Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Adelaide's voice trembled slightly but grew stronger with each word. I, Adelaide Rose Foster, take you, Kieran James Blackwood, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, drawing a few good-natured whoops from his fellow ranch hands. The celebration afterward was held in Martha's backyard, transformed by the community's efforts into a festive gathering space. Tables groaned with potluck contributions. A fiddle player from one of the local saloons provided lively music, and lanterns were strung from tree branches in preparation for evening. As Adelaide and Kieran moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes, she was struck by how different this felt from any social event she had attended in Silver Creek. There was no rigid hierarchy here, no careful calculation of status or worth, just genuine celebration. Mrs. Blackwood, Kieran murmured near her ear as they finally found a moment alone. How does it sound? Perfect, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Absolutely perfect. As evening approached, they prepared to depart for their new home. Kieran had arranged for a wagon to transport them and Adelaide's belongings to the homestead, a journey of several hours that would see them arriving just after nightfall. The goodbye to Martha was emotional, with promises of visits in both directions once the couple was settled. As they climbed into the wagon amidst a shower of rice and well-wishes, Adelaide felt a curious mixture of endings and beginnings swirling around her. The journey to their new home passed in comfortable conversation and occasional comfortable silences, as the landscape gradually changed from Helena's foothills to rolling prairie interspersed with stands of pine and aspen. When Kieran finally pointed to a distant structure silhouetted against the sunset, Adelaide felt her heart quicken. There it is, he said, pride evident in his voice. Our home. As they drew closer, the cabin took shape larger than Adelaide had imagined, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a small covered porch across the front. Behind it stood a barn and corral, and beyond that, the land stretched toward distant mountains, the grass golden in the fading light. Kieran helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold, he explained with a smile. Inside, Adelaide gasped at the care that had gone into preparing the home for her arrival. The main room was simply but thoughtfully furnished with a sturdy table and chairs, a sofa near the fireplace, and shelves holding the books and small treasures they had each contributed. Curtains hung at the windows, clearly a recent addition, and a colorful rag rug warmed the plank floor. Kieran, it's wonderful, she breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. The bedroom is through there, he said, gesturing to a door at the back of the main room. And I've started work on what could be another room eventually. For when we might need it. The shy hope in his voice made Adelaide's heart swell as she understood his meaning. A family. Their family. She crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest. Show me, she whispered. Later, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Adelaide lay in her husband's arms, her body still humming from their lovemaking. The intimacy they had shared had been everything she had hoped for, tender, passionate, and imbued with the deep connection they had built over months of heartfelt correspondence and growing love. Are you happy? Kieran asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Adelaide raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "When I first saw you that day in Silver Creek, standing alone with your bag, looking like the world had ended but refusing to break, I knew then you were someone special," he confessed. "I just never dreamed you could be mine." Adelaide leaned down to kiss him. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The days and weeks that followed established the rhythm of their new life together. Adelaide quickly adapted to the responsibilities of managing their household, while Kieran worked tirelessly to build their small ranch. They acquired a few cattle and horses to start their herd, planted a vegetable garden that Adelaide tended with growing expertise, and worked side by side to improve their home. By late summer, they had added a proper kitchen to the cabin and expanded the small barn. On Saturday evenings, they often rode to the nearest settlement for supplies and to socialize with neighboring homesteaders, gradually building a community of friends in their new life. Their physical relationship deepened as they learned each other's bodies and desires, their nights filled with a passion that sometimes left them breathless and always left them more deeply connected. During quiet evenings, they continued their habit of sharing thoughts and dreams, reading aloud to each other from treasured books, or simply sitting together on the porch watching the sun set over their land. In early September, as the first hints of autumn touched the aspens with gold, Adelaide confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was carrying their first child. When she shared the news with Kieran over dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His eyes filled with tears of joy, and he knelt beside her chair, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach as if he might already hear the tiny heartbeat within. "A baby," he whispered in awe. "Our baby." "Due in the spring, I think," Adelaide said, running her fingers through his hair. "Just in time for new beginnings." That night, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Kieran asked, "Are you afraid? About the birth, I mean?" Adelaide considered his question honestly. "A little," she admitted, "but there's a midwife in the settlement who seems very knowledgeable. And Aunt Martha has promised to come stay with us when the time approaches." "I'll make sure you have everything you need," Kieran vowed. "Both of you." As her pregnancy progressed, Adelaide's body changed, her dresses requiring adjustment and her energy sometimes flagging by late afternoon. Yet she had never felt more beautiful than when she caught Kieran watching her with reverence as she moved about their home, her hands often resting protectively on her growing belly. In October, a letter arrived from Silver Creek, not from her father, but from Mrs. Holloway's sister who ran the general store there. The news it contained was unexpected. Judge William Foster had suffered a stroke. He was alive but weakened, his fierce independence compromised by partial paralysis on his right side. Adelaide read the letter multiple times, conflicting emotions warring within her. That evening she shared it with Kieran as they sat before the fireplace. "You want to go to him?" he asked after listening thoughtfully. "I don't know," Adelaide confessed. "Part of me says he made his choice when he cast me out, but another part remembers the father he was before grief hardened him." Kieran took her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you want to go to Silver Creek, we'll go together." Adelaide leaned against his solid strength. "Let me think on it a while longer." A week later, another letter arrived, this one addressed in a shaky hand that Adelaide recognized despite its deterioration. Inside was a brief note from her father. "Adelaide, I understand you are with child. I find myself contemplating legacy in ways I had not before. If you could find it in your heart to visit an old man who has come to recognize his mistakes, I would be grateful. Your father." That night, after much discussion, Adelaide and Kieran made their decision. They would travel to Silver Creek after the first heavy snowfall had passed, when travel would be safer for Adelaide in her condition. December brought deep snow and preparations for both Christmas and their journey. Kieran worked with a neighbor to craft a cradle from pine, while Adelaide sewed tiny garments from soft flannel, her thoughts often drifting between the future growing within her and the past waiting in Silver Creek. By January, the roads were passable again, and they set out in a wagon fitted with runners for the snow, well supplied for the 3-day journey. Adelaide found herself growing increasingly nervous as familiar landmarks appeared, signaling their approach to the town she had fled nearly a year before. "We can turn back," Kieran offered, noting her tension as the outskirts of Silver Creek came into view. "Say the word and we'll head straight home." Adelaide squared her shoulders. "No, it's time to face this to close this chapter properly." The town appeared both unchanged and somehow smaller than in her memory. As their wagon rolled down the main street, Adelaide was acutely aware of curious glances and whispers. Her pregnancy was obvious now, her condition impossible to hide beneath her heavy winter coat. They stopped first at the town's only hotel to secure rooms for their stay, then made their way to the imposing house at the end of Maple Street, where Adelaide had grown up. The walk to the front door felt eternal, each step weighted with memories both painful and precious. The housekeeper who answered their knock, a new woman Adelaide didn't recognize, led them to the study where Judge Foster now spent most of his days. The once formidable man sat in a wheelchair beside the window, a blanket over his legs despite the roaring fire in the grate. His right hand lay useless in his lap, and his face showed the asymmetry typical of stroke survivors. But his eyes, those were unchanged, sharp and assessing as they took in first Adelaide's pregnant form, then Kieran's protective stance beside her. "Father," Adelaide said softly. "We came as soon as the roads allowed." "Adelaide," he replied, his speech slightly slurred but intelligible. "And Mr. Blackwood, I presume." Kieran stepped forward, offering his hand to the judge's left one. "Sir, thank you for inviting us to your home." The formality of the greeting seemed to please the old man, who gestured for them to sit in the chairs arranged near his wheelchair. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "You look well," Judge Foster finally said, echoing his words from their brief meeting in Helena. "Motherhood agrees with you. We're very happy about the baby," Adelaide replied, resting her hand on her rounded belly. "Due in April." "A spring child," her father nodded. "Like you were." The mention of her birth, something her father rarely referenced, surprised Adelaide. "Yes, I suppose so." Judge Foster turned his attention to Kieran. "I understand you've established a homestead north of Helena." "Yes, sir. 80 acres with water rights. We've made a good start with cattle and horses." "Ambitious," the judge commented, "for a former ranch hand." Adelaide tensed at the apparent criticism, but Kieran merely nodded. "I believe in working for what matters, sir. Your daughter and our child matter more than anything." Something shifted in the old man's expression, a softening around the eyes that Adelaide hadn't seen in years. "She always was stubborn," he said unexpectedly. "Like her mother. Margaret would argue with me until the cows came home if she thought I was being unreasonable." "I remember," Adelaide said quietly. "She taught me to stand my ground." That she did. For the first time, regret openly crossed her father's face. "I forgot that lesson after she was gone," became the very sort of unyielding man she would have despised. The admission hung in the air between them, more apology than Adelaide had ever expected to hear from her proud father. She reached for Kieran's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Why did you ask us to come, Father?" she finally asked directly. Judge Foster's left hand tightened on the arm of his wheelchair. "Because this," he gestured to his weakened body, "has a way of clarifying what matters. and I find that I do not wish to die estranged from my only child and never knowing my grandchild." The blunt honesty of his statement brought tears to Adelaide's eyes. "I don't wish that either," she admitted. "Then perhaps we can begin again," he suggested, his voice gruff with emotion he clearly found difficult to express. "Not as we were that cannot be undone, but perhaps as we might be now." That evening, as Adelaide and Kieran prepared for bed in their hotel room, she found herself processing the unexpected turn the day had taken. "He's changed," she said, brushing out her hair at the small vanity. "Or perhaps his circumstances have forced him to change." Kieran, already in bed, watched her with thoughtful eyes. "Do you think it's genuine?" Adelaide considered the question carefully. "Yes," she finally said. "The stroke has taken many things from him, but it seems to have given him perspective in return. I don't think he has the energy for pretense anymore." "And how do you feel about it?" Kieran asked, the question she had been asking herself since leaving her father's house. "Cautiously hopeful," she decided. "Not ready to forget the past, but perhaps ready to build something new." She joined him in bed, curling against his warmth. "Is that foolish?" "No," Kieran said, his hand coming to rest protectively over their unborn child. "It's grace, something the world could use more of." They stayed in Silver Creek for a week, visiting the judge daily. Each conversation became a little easier than the last, as they carefully navigated the new boundaries of their relationship. Adelaide shared stories of her life in Helena, and then on the homestead, while her father occasionally offered glimpses into his own adjustment to dependency after a lifetime of self-sufficiency. On their final day in town, as they prepared to return home, Judge Foster presented them with a legal document. "I've had my affairs in order for some time," he explained, "but recent events have prompted some revisions. This ensures that after my passing, the house and my remaining assets will transfer to you, Adelaide, and subsequently to your children." Adelaide stared at the document in shock. "Father, I don't expect you to move back to Silver Creek," he interrupted. "Your life is elsewhere now, as it should be. But the house has been in our family for 3 generations. It should remain so." As they said their goodbyes, the judge surprised them once more by asking, "Might I visit when the weather improves and the baby has arrived? My condition makes travel difficult but not impossible with proper arrangements." The request, so tentative from a man who had once commanded every room he entered, touched Adelaide deeply. "We would welcome that," she said sincerely. Their journey home was filled with reflection and planning for the baby's arrival, for the spring planting, for the possibility of a visit from Judge Foster when summer came. Adelaide felt as though a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted, allowing her to embrace her future more completely. By late March, the homestead was fully prepared for the new arrival. The cradle stood ready in the corner of their bedroom. Tiny clothes were folded in a chest Kieran had built, and Martha had arrived to help with the birth and early days of motherhood. On a bright April morning, with wildflowers beginning to dot the prairie around their home, Adelaide's labor began. For 16 hours, she worked to bring their child into the world, Kieran never leaving her side despite Martha's initial protests that men had no place in the birthing room. "He stays," Adelaide had insisted through gritted teeth during a particularly difficult contraction. "He's part of this too." As dawn broke on the second day, their daughter entered the world with a powerful cry that immediately brought tears to Kieran's eyes. The midwife cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing her in Adelaide's exhausted arms. "She's perfect," Adelaide whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Absolutely perfect." Kieran sat beside them on the bed, one arm around his wife, the other gently touching their daughter's downy head. "What shall we call her?" Adelaide looked into the newborn's face, already showing hints of both her parents in the shape of her eyes and the curve of her lips. "Margaret," she said, "after my mother, Margaret Martha Blackwood." "It's beautiful," Kieran agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world, little Margaret." The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment as they learned to navigate life with a newborn. Nights were often broken by hungry cries, and days revolved around the rhythms of feeding and changing. Yet despite the exhaustion, Adelaide had never felt more fulfilled. Kieran proved to be a devoted father, as comfortable cradling Margaret against his chest, while working through ranch accounts as he was changing her or singing softly to lull her to sleep. The sight of her strong husband gentled by their tiny daughter never failed to fill Adelaide's heart with overwhelming love. By June, they had settled into a functioning routine, and Martha had returned to Helena with promises to visit often. The homestead was flourishing, the cattle herd growing, the garden producing abundantly, and plans underway for an addition to the cabin. When a letter arrived announcing Judge Foster's intention to visit in July, accompanied by a hired nurse, Adelaide felt prepared to welcome this final piece of their expanding family circle. The judge's visit proved less awkward than anticipated. Though physically diminished, his mind remained sharp, and he showed genuine interest in the homestead's operations and development. Most surprising was his interaction with Margaret, who seemed fascinated by her grandfather's watch chain and would sit contentedly on his good knee while he told her stories in a gentle voice Adelaide barely recognized. On the final evening of his visit, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Judge Foster unexpectedly addressed Kieran directly. "You've built something significant here," he observed, gesturing to the thriving homestead before them. "I was wrong about you, about both of you." Kieran nodded his acknowledgement of the admission. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." "She was right to choose you," the judge continued, watching Adelaide as she rocked Margaret to sleep nearby. "I see that now." As summer faded into autumn and then winter, life on the homestead continued to evolve. Adelaide began keeping a journal again, not just for herself this time, but as a record for Margaret of their family's story. In it, she wrote of daily joys and challenges, of the growing community of neighboring homesteaders who gathered for barn raisings and harvest celebrations, and of the healing that had begun with her father's visit. Judge William Foster returned the following summer. His health further declined, but his spirit notably lightened. He spent hours with his granddaughter, now toddling and babbling, clearly determined to forge a relationship that transcended the mistakes of the past. By Margaret's second birthday, the homestead had expanded to include a proper kitchen garden, additional grazing land purchased from a neighbor, and the foundation for a schoolhouse that would serve the growing number of families in the area. Adelaide found herself increasingly involved in community matters, her natural intelligence and education valued by her neighbors in a way that would have been impossible in the rigid society of Silver Creek. When news came of Judge Foster's passing in the winter of 1880, the grief Adelaide felt was clean and uncomplicated sorrow for the father she had reconciled with, rather than the one who had rejected her. Kieran accompanied her to Silver Creek for the funeral, Margaret staying behind with Martha. The town that had once banished her now received her with respect as Judge Foster's daughter and heir. Many who had turned their backs before now offered condolences, some with genuine remorse for their past behavior. Adelaide accepted their words graciously, finding that old hurts had lost their power to wound her. Thomas Garrett attended the funeral with his wife and young son. When they came face to face at the reception afterward, Adelaide felt nothing but a distant curiosity about the man who had once seemed so important to her future. "Adelaide," he greeted her awkwardly. "I was sorry to hear about your father." "Thank you, Thomas," she replied calmly. "I heard you've done well for yourself," he continued, glancing toward Kieran, who stood nearby. "A ranch and a family." Adelaide smiled, genuinely amused by his evident surprise. "Yes, I have. Everything I truly wanted, as it turns out." When they left Silver Creek 3 days later, the Foster house locked behind them, and its contents carefully inventoried for eventual decisions. Adelaide felt no regret. She had made her peace with the town and its memories. Her life, her real life, awaited her elsewhere. Spring 1881 brought another addition to their family, a son they named William Kieran, whose arrival coincided with the completion of the schoolhouse, where Adelaide had agreed to teach reading and arithmetic 3 days a week. The community around them continued to grow, with the nearest settlement now boasting a proper general store, a church, and even a small newspaper. As they celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary that May, Kieran surprised Adelaide with a new addition to the cabin, a proper study with built-in bookshelves, and a desk beneath a window overlooking the mountains. "For your writing," he explained as she explored the space in delighted surprise. "And for teaching the children." "It's perfect," she said, embracing him tightly. "Absolutely perfect." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing Kieran had built the previous summer. The homestead spread before them, no longer just a dream but a thriving reality, the product of their shared vision and hard work. "Did you ever imagine this?" Adelaide asked, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed gently. "When you stopped to help a disgraced woman with a carpetbag, did you imagine we would build all this together?" Kieran's arm tightened around her. "I knew you were special from that first moment," he said. "But this," he gestured to the life they had created, "this exceeds anything I could have dreamed." Adelaide tilted her face up to his. "Do you remember what you said to me that day, when I asked why you would help me when everyone else had turned away?" "I said loving someone shouldn't be a crime," Kieran recalled. "That you'd always be right in my eyes. And I've tried to live up to that faith ever since," she said softly. Kieran kissed her with the same tenderness that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. "You've exceeded it, Adelaide Blackwood. Every single day." As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Adelaide reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from rejection to acceptance, from shame to pride, from isolation to belonging. The path had not been straight or easy, but every turn had led her home to this man, these children, this life that she had built with her own strength and love. She had once been banished for loving the wrong man. But in being cast out, she had found the right one, a cowboy who had seen her worth when no one else would, who had offered her not just love but partnership, respect, and the freedom to become her truest self. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran whispered, "No regrets." Adelaide smiled in the darkness, her heart full. "Not a single one,"